Well, we try to communicate to PCB by using its IP address, right? So we send ping request on the IP address. Now let's try to send ping request on host name. But first, let's understand about the host name. As we know in the theory, the host name is nothing but the name provided to the PCs, and this is like user-friendly name. So if we have like hundreds of computers, we don't want to know about their IP addresses. Instead, we want to communicate with their host name. So first, let's assign the host name on these PCs. Well, to assign the host name, all we can do is we can go to, let's take PCA, go to config. So here is display name, and let's provide some user-friendly names. So this is going to be Ted's computer, and we can just close this out and should be its host name. Let's verify one more time. Yeah, it is. Now let's assign the host name for these computers as well. It's going to be Bob for PCB, and PCC, let's assign the host name as a Mike, right? So we have now host name assigned on these computers. So we try to communicate with by using their IP address. Now let's try to make the ping request by using the host name. So I'm going to send ping request from PC A to PCB, but by using the host name. So the host name of PCB has been set Bob. Let's see what happens. So it says the ping request could not be find the host Bob. Please check the name and try again. So in this scenario, what PCA tried to do, PCA tried to communicate PCB by using its host name. Now the problem is computers only communicate by using the IP to MAC binding. It does not know about the host name, and in order to communicate by using the host name, PC should know the binding between the host name and IP address as well. So the host name will get bind with the IP and IP will get bind with the MAC, and that is how the communication is going to work. So how we can solve this problem so that PCA should know about the host name Bob for PCB. As we understood a while ago, to have the name to IP conversion, we need to have DNS set up. So DNS will do the host to name conversion. So what will happen? Let's say we have configured one of the DNS server here. Okay. So PCA will request DNS server that I would like to communicate PC, which name is Bob. So DNS is going to look up into its table and it will see whether the Bob has which IP address, and it's going to see, okay, now Bob has IP address which is 192.168.10.12. So it is going to forward this request back to PCA, and it will say, okay, in order to communicate with Bob, you need to use this particular IP address, and then PCA will send request directly to PCB on its IP address. And we already know what happens when the request is sent to IP address. It will be able to communicate with PCB. So that is the use of the DNS server to convert the name to IP. Now let's verify how we can make that conversion happen. So first, let's create the binding from name to IP so that we should be able to communicate by using the host name. So in packet tracer, I'm going into the services in DNS, and here we have the table. So in this table we are going to provide the name. So I'm going to communicate with Bob, okay, and by using its IP address which is 192.168.10.12, and this is basically a record which means it's going to convert from name to IP. So we will just add this detail. Let's put the other host information as well, like we use for TED and its IP address which is 192.168.10.11. Add. Now also add for Mike, has an IP address which is 192.168.10.13. Okay, so we have created the binding here. So we have the host name for Bob and has an IP address .12. Now let's try to communicate whether the communication happens by using the host name or not. So let's go to PC back on computer A and we will send the ping request again, but by using the host name. So ping Bob. Okay, at this point it is also not able to resolve the host name to IP. And why is that? It's because if we check our configuration, we have configured the IP address, subnet mask, we haven't configured the default gateway which we do not require, but we are missing the DNS server. So what is our DNS server? At this point our DNS server is 192.168.10.10. So we need to provide information on the PC in order to have them communicate with server. So what will happen? So in here PCA will send query to DNS server and it will ask for the information. Can you tell me who has the name which is Bob? Then DNS server is going to look up its own table what we created for the binding and it will send the IP address which is created 192.168.10.12 to PCA. So let's try to generate packet by configuring the DNS IP address first. So on PCA we'll go back and configure the DNS server IP address which is 192.168.10.10. Let's copy this and we can just paste this on other computers as well. We'll go to Bob's PC and we'll type the same DNS server. Let's go to Mike and do the same thing. We'll paste this information and we are good to go. Now at this point let's try to communicate one more time by using the host name. So we'll go again and we'll send the ping to Bob. Now let's see what happens. Now we are able to communicate and you can also see we try to communicate by using the host name, but the host name was converted into the IP address and the IP address did know like how to reach because it has information coming from Bob already about the MAC address. So that is how the communication happens by using the host name. Now let's try to do the ping request vice versa, whether the communication happens or not. So let's try to ping Ted from Bob's PC. Let's see what happens. So Bob is also able to ping Ted. So now let's try to communicate from Bob's PC to Mike. So we'll send ping to Mike. Now Bob is also able to communicate with Mike. So we are able to communicate from PC to PC by using its IP address and by using its host name. So what is happening here? Actually host name is communicating with IP address and IP address is communicating with the MAC address. So that is how the computer communicates with each other. So in summary, when computers would like to communicate with each other, they want to know about the identities, and those identities are MAC ID, the IP address, or maybe the host name, and this all information they work together in order to have the computer communication. Well, this is for now and I will see you in the next video with different topic.